Jonas, is that really you?
Barking 2 miles off could sound like it was in your yard. A rifle shot carried to the next county. And a piano played in a lit room on a windless January night. Could be heard at 3 miles as a rumor, and at 2 as a melody, and at 1 as a woman's hands moving over the keys. Sound carries. That's all it is. Cold air, still night, plain physics. But on one particular night in the winter of 1882, that plain physics was the only thing standing between a man and dying face down in a snowdrift 11 miles from the nearest human being. 2 years later, he came back to say thank you. He arrived on the worst possible day. She would beg him that morning for a piano. She had it all rehearsed. She had all week to rehearse it, and she got it out before the man on her doorstep could even open his mouth. Take the ranch. Just leave the piano. And the stranger said a sentence that made no sense at all, that he had not come for the ranch or the stock or the land. He'd come for the woman who played it. She would stand there in her own doorway, with everything she owned in crates behind her, entirely unable to understand what he meant, because Susanna Rye had never once seen that man's face, and he had never seen hers. Cold Spring, Wyoming Territory, was a scatter of ranches along a creek, and the Rye place was the last one up the road before the country gave out into open plain. Susanna Rye had come there at 22 as a bride, and was 31 now, and a widow for one of those years. It was a small, hard outfit. 200 head in a good year, a house of 4 rooms, a windmill, and a stand of cottonwoods her husband had planted the first spring and complained about ever after. She ran it alone after he died, and ran it competently, which the county noticed and did not quite know what to do with. And in the front room of that 4-room house, taking up more of it than any sensible object should, stood a rosewood upright piano. It had been her mother's, come from Missouri in 1875 in the bed of a wagon, wrapped in 3 quilts, and it very nearly hadn't come at all. Her father had wanted it sold before they started. There had been the only real fight of that marriage about it, and her mother had won. They lost a wagon at the Platte Crossing, and a horse in Nebraska. The piano got there. Her mother played 11 years and died of pneumonia in 80, and Susanna had to haul 40 miles to her own place with 2 teams and a borrowed flatbed, because it was the only thing in the world that was hers. It was badly out of tune by 1884, and there was no one within 100 miles to tune it. She played it anyway. She played it every night at 9. Not for anybody. There was nobody. It was the 1 hour of the day that belonged to her. After the stock and the supper and the books, before the lamp had to go out to save oil. An hour at the Keys, in a lit front room, on a plain that went black and empty in every direction as far as a person could ride. She'd done it as a girl, as a wife, and now as a widow. Susanna Rye had no idea anyone heard her at all. She thought she was playing into nothing. The paper came to light 3 weeks after the funeral. Thomas Rye had mortgaged a ranch in the spring of 1882, house, land, and water, to buy a share in a smelter venture up at Rawlins that a friend swore was certain money. He had not told her. There was no legal reason he had to, and no personal reason on earth he shouldn't have. The smelter failed in 18 months. Then a horse rolled on him in November and took the rest of the argument off the table entirely. She was 30 and a widow, and she owed a bank in Rawlins $1,100 for a smelter she had never laid eyes on a paper she had never seen. She did not go quietly, and it should be said plainly, because the story usually gets told as though she waited to be rescued. She sold 60 head in the bad market, and her husband's saddle horse, and his rifle, and her own mother's brooch. She took in sewing from 3 ranches in the hotel and sat up past midnight at it, and it brought in dollars where she needed hundreds. She rode to Rawlins and sat across a desk from a bank officer who was perfectly polite and entirely immovable, and asked for an extension. She got 4 months and used them well, and it was never going to be enough. Everyone in that room had known it when they granted them. The bank set the sale for the last day of March. Mr. Prine came out from Rawlins in February to inventory the property, which is a thing nobody should ever have to watch. He was not a cruel man. He was a collection agent, which is worse in some ways, simply the shape the arithmetic took when it came up your lane. He walked her house with a notebook, stock, implements, furnishings. He wrote down the piano. Susanna Rye, who had not once in 4 months asked anybody for anything, asked him then whether she might keep it. It had been her mother's. It had come from Missouri in a wagon. She heard herself say it and hated the sound, the only thing she had. Mr. Prime was sorry, in the flat way of a man who has said this many times. The contents went with the property. That was the paper. 2 winters before that, on the 14th of January, 1882, a horse trader named Jonas Reeve got caught out on the open plain by a norther that came down faster than any man could ride. He was 33 years old, alone, and 11 miles from anything. The snow blinded him inside 2 hours. Not a figure of speech. The true kind. The kind with the glare burns the eyes and they swell shut, and a man is left crawling in a white world he cannot see. He lost the trail. He lost his horse. By full dark, he was walking because stopping was dying, and he had no idea at all which direction he was walking in. And then, out of the black, from somewhere he could not begin to place, Jonas Reeve heard a piano. He thought he'd gone mad, at first. Men do, out there. But cold air on a still night carries what it's given, and what was given him was music. Thin and far and absolutely real, somewhere ahead and to his left. Sound carries. He turned toward it and walked, and could not tell whether it was 1 mile or 5. It was 3. He fell twice. The second time he lay a while. But the piano kept going. She played the full hour. She always did, and a man crawling through a snowfield with his eyes swollen shut kept a bearing on a rosewood upright he could not have described, and came up at last against a fence post, and then a rail, and then a wall. He got round it to the light he could feel but not see, and beat on a door. The music stopped. She had him inside before the door was fully open, which is a frontier for you. Susanna Rye, 29 then, her husband gone to Rawlins for 4 days, dragged a stranger twice her weight across her own threshold, and did what had to be done. Got the frozen clothes off him, warmed him slow, the right way, which takes hours, bandaged his eyes and made him keep the bandage on, because she'd seen snow blindness before and knew light was the enemy for days. The fever came the second night, and she sat up with it. And in the evenings, at 9, because it was the hour and because a fevered man in the dark needs something to hold on to, she played. Jonas Reeve lay in a stranger's front room with his eyes bound in cloth for 3 days. Heard a woman's voice tell him he'd live, and heard her hands on a badly tuned piano every night at 9. He never saw one thing. He rode out on the 4th morning against her judgment, on a borrowed horse, with his eyes still weeping and a scarf tied over them. He had $11, no outfit, and a dead horse somewhere under the snow with everything else he owned strapped to it. He stood in her doorway and tried to say what he'd come to understand, that a woman he had never seen had spent 3 days keeping a stranger alive for no reason but that he'd turned up. He didn't have the words. Most men don't. What he had was his father's pocket knife, bone-handled, worn smooth, the only thing on him worth anything at all. He put it in her hand. "I'll be back for that," he said. "It'll be a while. But I'll be back, and I'll come square with you." Susanna Rye had heard men say things in doorways before. She said, "Mind your eyes, Mr. Reeve." And she put the knife in the piano bench, under the sheet music, and did not take it out again for 2 years, though she knew exactly where it was the whole time, which is a different thing from forgetting. He meant it as it happens. Jonas Reeve spent 1882 and 1883 working like a man with a number in his head, because he had won. Whatever it took to come back, not as a beggar. He broke horses in Colorado, ran freight over the Laramie Road, took a contract supplying remounts to a stage line, and made, over 2 years, the first real stake of his life. He wrote no letters, because a man who turns up in a doorway saying "I'll be back," and then writes letters about his only making noise. He'd go when he could go square. It was a stupid plan in one specific way, which is that 2 years is a long time and the world does not sit still in it. He rode back into Cold Spring in the last week of March, 1884, and the first thing he heard, in the first store he walked into, was that the widow Rye was being sold up at the end of the month. He asked 3 questions and got the whole of it. The dead husband, the mortgage she'd never signed, the bank in Rawlins, the date. Jonas Reeve rode to Rawlins that same afternoon and bought the note, full price, $1,140, very nearly everything he had made in 2 years of not sleeping much. The bank was delighted. A bank would infinitely rather have cash from a horse trader than a ranch it has to sell. He told no one in that county what he'd done, because it was nobody's business, and because he had a suspicion, correct as it turned out, about how the woman would take it. He got there on the morning of the 31st. Susanna had been up since 4. Everything she owned that would fit was in crates in the front room. Hollis Crane from down the creek had been by twice that week to ask, with enormous delicacy, about the water rights. She had asked Prime one more time, the night before, about the piano, offered to buy it back at whatever he thought fair, on terms, over years. He had been sorry again. The contents went with the property. At 9:30 in the morning, a rider she did not know came up the Cold Spring Road, stopped in her yard, and came to her door with something in his hand. Susanna, Rye did not wait for him to speak. She had rehearsed this all week, and if she waited, she was going to lose her nerve. Take the ranch, she said. Her voice held, which she was proud of afterward. Take the stock in the house and the ground and every stick in it. I'll not fight you, and I'll be off it by dark. But leave the piano. The man in her yard had stopped where he was. It was my mother's. It came from Missouri in a wagon. It's worth about nothing to you. You'd not get $20 for it in this county, and it'd cost you $30 to haul it out. She ran out of breath and out of dignity at about the same moment. Take the ranch. Just leave the piano. There was a long pause in her yard, and the stranger said, Ma'am, I didn't come for the ranch. He took his hat off. I came for the woman who plays it. Susanna Rye stood in her doorway and could not make the sentence mean anything. I'm sorry, who are you? Jonas Reeve. He turned the hat in his hands. You'd not know me by looking. There's no reason you would. And then, because she was clearly about to ask a great many things at once, he said it plainly. January of '82. The Norther. I was snowblind 11 miles out, and I'd have died in it. Only you were playing at 9 o'clock, and cold air carries. I walked 3 miles at it. You took me in and kept me 3 days, with a bandage on my eyes the whole while. He looked up. I never saw your face once in my life. I'd not know you now if you passed me in the street, but I'd know your hands on that piano from a mile off in the dark. I've had 2 years to be certain of it. She put her hand flat on the doorframe. You left a knife, she said. I did. She turned and walked into her own front room, past the crates, to the piano, lifted the lid of the bench, and took out from under the sheet music a bone-handled pocket knife, worn smooth, that had lain there 2 years and 2 months. Jonas Reeve looked at it in her hand for rather a long time. You kept it. I put it somewhere, said Susanna Rye, and then I didn't think about it, which was a lie, and they both knew it, and she did not take it back. Then he gave her the paper. She read it twice before she understood what she was holding, and when she did, her face closed like a door. No, she said. Mrs. Rye. No, I'll not take a ranch off a stranger. I've spent a year being pitted by this county, and I'll not be bought out of it. Her chin came up. You've been very kind. Take your money back to the bank and get it undone. It's not pity, Jonah said. It's charity, which is pity with a bank draft. It's a debt, he said. And something in how he said it made her stop. Ma'am, you gave 3 days of your life to a man you'd never seen and could not identify, in a house with no one else in it, and asked nothing. I've spent 2 years earning the means to come back and settle that, because I could not have lived the rest of it owing you my whole existence. He nodded at the paper in her hand. That's not a gift. That's the bill. You've been carrying it 2 years, and I'm finally good for it. Susanna Rye stood in her doorway with a foreclosure note in one hand and a pocket knife in the other, and did the hardest arithmetic of that year. She could not fault it. That was the trouble. She turned it over twice looking for the charity in it, and what she found instead was a man settling up. All right, she said at last. On my terms. Ma'am, you've paid a debt. That's all you've done, and I'll thank you not to hear it any other way. You'll not be owed a thing after today. She folded the paper. And if you've some notion in your head about a woman you heard through a wall 2 winters ago, then you'll court me like a man with nothing in his pocket from the beginning, same as anybody, because that's what I'll have you as. Not the man who bought my ranch. Jonas Reeve, who had rehearsed nothing at all, said, "Yes, ma'am." Mr. Prine arrived at 10 o'clock with a wagon and 2 men, was handed a paid note in his own bank's hand, and stood in that yard reading it 3 times. He was, to his credit, not sorry to be wrong. He wished her well, quite genuinely, and turned the wagon around. The county spent the spring assembling an explanation. None of it right, most of it romantic, all of it missing the actual mechanism, which was cold air, a still night, and a woman with a habit. Jonas Reeve courted Susanna Rye from nothing for 7 months, exactly as instructed. They were married in the October. They burned the note that winter in the kitchen stove she'd cooked his first proper meal on, which she said was the only ceremony the thing deserved. The knife went back in the piano bench, where it stayed. And the piano stayed where it was, taking up more of that front room than any sensible object should, still badly out of tune, until a man came through from Cheyenne in '87 who knew how, and Jonas paid him $4, which Susanna said was extravagant and did not mean. She went on playing at 9 o'clock, as a wife again, and later with 2 children asleep down the hall, and later still for a granddaughter who wanted only the fast ones. 51 years, on a rosewood upright that came from Missouri under 3 quilts. There's a thing, she said, years on, that the family kept. A grandchild asked her once why she'd always played at 9, out there on an empty plain, with nobody in 10 miles to hear it. And Susanna Reeve said she'd wondered that herself for most of her life. She thought she was playing into nothing, a woman alone in a lit room, making a sound that went out into the dark and stopped. But it never did stop, she said. That's the part one had wrong. Cold night, still air, frozen ground. It went out across that plain every single night for years, farther than she ever knew, past fences and draws and men on the road who heard it and knew where they were. And one January it reached a blind man 11 miles out who had no other thing in the world to walk toward. Sound carries. It always did. She just never knew who was listening.